Hello, everybody. This is Matthew Brand. Welcome to the Amethyst Podcast, and now we are going into cigars. Now, the first one was about Christian thoughts that went through my head. The second section was about Avatar: The Last Airbender and Tarot series, connecting characters in the show to the major arcana. Seems like a jump from Christian talks to tarot cards, but as I explained initially before I got into it, I don't see tarot cards as a mystical Yu-Gi-Oh! Power of the Cards thing. It's more of a picture book of psychological aspects that make up a lot of the characters that we write into the stories that we have since ancient times. Kind of the hero of a thousand faces, or the story that of the hero's journey that you see throughout all of different types of stories. The cards represent that and represent a lot of characters in those shows. A lot of the characters, even if you look at shows that have a lot of Christian themes and different things like that, these characters are very often represented in these tarot cards. And it can also, being that these are things that go on throughout life, can help give some perspective on maybe where you may be stuck, right? Instead of thinking of them as some type of, medium to contact demonic spirits or something, or however they're typically used in psychic parlors or so on and so forth. But moving into cigars, it may seem like this channel is just jumping all over the place, right? This podcast, but really, what I'm trying to do is create a avenue for people who have similar interests to me, and maybe if they have some similar interests, they may be open to connecting to other interests uh, that I may have if they don't have them, or you know, maybe they have all these interests, and there's not really a hub for people who are just as weird as I am, and there may be a home for them to listen to things, feel like they fit in, so to speak. And that was something I was kind of talking about with the tarot cards, especially when I was talking about one of the longer episodes, The Wheel of Fortune, right? A lot of times, as things change around us, sometimes we feel like there's a spot we don't really fit in. You hear a lot of people saying, they feel like they were born in the wrong time period, except for maybe being black, right? Sometimes you feel like, yeah, I have a old school traditional, kind of mindset when it comes to sensibilities, but perhaps not when it comes to racism, so to speak. So that being said, the reason the move on to cigars is, or why cigars, I used to do favors a lot for people, and those favors very often got abused. People would take advantage. So, in exchange for certain favors, very often I would ask for a cigar. The reason I got into cigars in the first place was because I felt very unhappy in two jobs that I had. I was working as a night baker, and that was miserable. In the daytime, I was working as a chef, and it's not that the job as a chef was miserable. I quite enjoyed the job, but what I will say is that there was a lot of pressure. It was a recession. Everybody needed a job. They very much made you feel replaceable, and there was always something. Like there was always some type of stress popping up. People were never really happy during that time period. So it made me feel like I really wanted a way out. So I started writing. It was something I could do from home on my off time, and there seemed to be a lot of avenues up for writing during that time period. This is when blogs were very popular, and was getting gigs, but it was never really paying to the extent that I could leave my main job, and having a face for radio and a voice for print. It really didn't seem like I would be able to become some form of YouTuber, uh, anything like that. Podcasts were popular at the time, or becoming popular, but they weren't monetarily popular the way they are now. Even the podcasts, I would say, that became very monetarily popular, like the Joe Rogan Experience, or maybe I'm trying to think of another one. Uh, Jordan Peterson, perhaps. There's other right wing media. Um, some, I would say, firearms. I think got really popular during the pandemic. But other than that, I would say a lot of the popular podcast shows became popular from being on YouTube and then transitioning over to podcast form. And even a lot of those weren't successful. Like they had shows like The Squanch, which was through, I can't even remember the name, Wisecrack, right? I think Wisecrack opened a show called the podcast show called The Squanch. And it went for a little bit, but it just kind of died down. A lot of their other channels, Wisecrack was really popular at a moment, but a lot of these channels and YouTube uh, shows, they died down over time. And now the people who are very popular, again, they have maybe YouTube or TikTok or Instagram. Instagram shows or channels that are very popular, and they're transitioning that media. Almost like when people tell you, hey, join OnlyFans out. This girl made this much money on OnlyFans. Well, what they usually don't tell you before trying to convince you to sell your body on the internet is that a lot of the reason these women have very successful OnlyFans is because they were celebrities in their own right before they even started the OnlyFans, such as the woman who, I can't think of her name at the moment, but the one who sings Black Widow and Bounce and um, I can't remember what her initial Fancy. So I'm so fancy, you already know. I think that's the name of the song. Anyway, I think she started like an OnlyFans for like 5 minutes and got really a lot of money from it. But again, this is somebody who is already somewhat of a celebrity. And that's kind of how the podcast worked, right? Joe Rogan was already a celebrity in his own right, and a lot of his podcast was on YouTube. That deal for Spotify for him to, switch over really put a lot of capital into him. But regardless, he was going to be successful because he was popular already. Uh, Podcast wasn't really a medium for people who didn't have a previous following, so to speak. It's not that there are no successful podcasts for people who didn't have a previous following. It's just that it's not it was never a golden goose or gold rush situation the way YouTube was at some point in time. The other channels or shows that really get popular, they're typically selling something in the first place. So like as I'm talking about cigars, right? Cigars Daily, I would say, is probably one of the most popular YouTube channels when it comes to cigars and stuff. But they're selling cigars. That's their business model. They're not trying to become famous from being YouTubers. It's a offshoot of their business that attracts a lot of customers for what they're selling. That's what they're getting wealthy from, is the sales. Same with a lot of YouTubers who do the fitness industry. That was very popular the last year or two, where you had a lot of people working out, being fit, getting lean, but they were taking steroids, and they weren't honest about the fact that they were taking steroids. But a lot of them were taking steroids, um, starving themselves, doing whatever they could to get this perfect body, and then trying to sell you some way to obtain what they've achieved. And a lot of it's genetics. You probably could never achieve that on your own, and a lot of it's genetics coupled with steroids or coupled with performance enhancers. Excuse my speech impediment. So these are things that had to be taken into consideration. So what I'm doing is I'm just going on and talk about things that interest me, like cigars, like religion, like nerd stuff, like anime and cartoons, TV shows, books, stuff like that. And perhaps by putting enough of that out there, I will not necessarily attract a huge audience that, draws in millions of eyes from all around the world, but perhaps a small community of people who are interested in the same things that I am. But that's why to move forward into cigars. Throwing a lot of stuff at the wall, see what sticks, and if a few things stick, then maybe people can branch off into a couple of different avenues they may not have considered before. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. That's just the reason I'm moving into cigars moving forward. And the next episode is going to kind of explain how I'm going to be rating the cigars. That being said, it's going to be a little bit different than normal cigar reviewers. I appreciate your attention and your time. God bless you. Peace out.